The sky above Earth darkened in an instant, as if the sun itself had blinked out of existence. Millions of people across the world froze, staring upward in horror as massive ships, unlike anything humanity had ever seen, descended from the heavens. Their dark, jagged forms blocked out the stars, casting a shadow so large it swallowed entire cities whole. This was no ordinary visit. It was an invasion. In every major city, confusion spread like wildfire. Screams echoed from crowded streets as people fled to shelters, hoping for a miracle, hoping they could survive the oncoming threat. Governments scrambled to respond, their communications failing to keep up with the speed and scale of the alien arrival. Panic and uncertainty filled the air. Among the chaos, a chilling message was broadcast worldwide, reverberating through televisions, radios, and even cell phones. A deep, mechanical voice broke the silence, speaking in a language that was both foreign and terrifying. And then, as if to prove that nothing could be beyond their reach, the voice translated. "We have come, and we have warned you. The Earth's survival depends on your submission. Failure to comply will result in your annihilation." The world held its breath. In a small, quiet town in the heart of the Midwest, Elias sat at his kitchen table, a steaming cup of coffee in his hand, eyes glued to the news broadcast. He could hear his wife, Margaret, pacing in the living room, her voice rising with worry as she spoke to a friend on the phone. "Elias," she said, coming into the kitchen. Her face was pale, and there was a tremor in her voice. "What are we going to do?" "They're here. It's happening." Elias stood and walked to the window, looking up at the sky, his heart sinking. The alien ships had already started to hover above the city. Their massive, dark shapes were an inescapable reality. It was impossible to ignore the fact that humanity was no longer in control of its own destiny. "We'll stay calm, Margaret," he said, though his own voice betrayed him. His thoughts raced. He had no answers. Nobody did. Lily, their 10-year-old daughter, stood at the door, her eyes wide but unwavering. She had always been the curious one, the one who looked at the world with a mix of awe and determination. But now, as she looked at her parents, there was something different in her gaze, something that filled Elias with a strange sense of hope. "Daddy, they warned us," she said, her voice small but clear. "But we can't let them just take over. We have to fight back." Elias turned to face her, his mind still trying to process what he was hearing. "Fight back? Sweetheart, how do you suppose we do that?" Lily looked up at him, her brow furrowed in thought, then said, "People like us, we can do things. We can come together. We have something that they don't understand, heart." It was such a simple answer, yet something about it rang true to Elias. For a moment, he felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in a long time, belief. He had to believe. For her, for his family, for everyone. Elsewhere, in the heart of the military command center, panic was setting in. General Katherine Harris, the head of Earth's Global Defense Coalition, sat at the command table, her face ashen as she watched the live feed of the alien ships moving across the planet. Her officers, typically resolute in the face of danger, sat in stunned silence. "We've never seen anything like this," one officer murmured, his voice shaking. "We have no defenses. Our weapons are useless." General Harris clenched her fists, trying to suppress her fear. "We've trained for years for something like this," she said, though the words felt hollow in the face of the invasion. "We can't give up yet." As the team began to scramble for a response, another officer spoke up, his face grim. "General, I'm receiving a new transmission from the alien ships. They say this is our final warning. They claim Earth has one chance to avoid annihilation." The room fell into a tense silence as General Harris processed the implications. The aliens were not here to negotiate. They had come to judge, to conquer, and they had made their intentions clear. Across the globe, humanity was divided. Some fled to the safety of underground bunkers, while others took to the streets in protest, demanding answers, demanding to know why Earth had been chosen for such a terrifying fate. And amidst all the chaos, there were those who stood still. People like Elias and Lily, who felt a deep, quiet certainty. Humanity's greatest weapon wasn't in the weapons they built or the military might they wielded, it was in their unity. They had survived countless struggles in the past, and now, they would have to do it again. But back in the alien command center, Zaylor, the fleet commander, watched the humans from above, his gaze cold and calculating. His race had conquered countless worlds, and their victory had always been swift. Yet, there was something strange about the humans' response. They were not bowing down in fear. Instead, they were resisting. "This is unexpected," Zaylor muttered. "They are weak in ways we can measure, yet they fight back with a strength we cannot predict." His advisor, Elon, approached him cautiously. "Commander, what is our next move?" Zaylor paused for a long moment, staring out at the earth below. "We give them one more chance. We will test their will. Let them prove they are worthy of survival." As the sun began to set over Elias's town, he gathered his family in the living room, the weight of the moment settling heavily on him. He looked at Lily, her face calm and determined, and for the first time since the invasion began, he didn't feel like he was facing it alone. "We can't stop them with weapons," he said quietly. "But we can stop them with heart. It's time to show them what humanity is really made of." Lily smiled, her eyes bright with the same determination that had fueled generations of humans before her. "We'll show them, Daddy. We'll show them we're stronger than they think." The world had changed in a matter of hours. What was once an ordinary day had now become the beginning of an extraordinary struggle for survival. Across the globe, humanity found itself at a crossroads. The invasion had begun, and the alien ships hovered ominously above, their dark shapes blotting out the sun. Fear rippled through every corner of the earth. But amidst the chaos, a quiet determination began to grow. Elias, Margaret, and Lily weren't the only ones who refused to bow to the alien forces. At an underground military facility deep beneath the Earth's surface, General Catherine Harris stood in front of a massive map, her eyes scanning the various reports flooding in from around the world. The situation was dire. Her team had tried every available weapon against the alien ships, missiles, bombs, energy pulses, but nothing seemed to even scratch the surface of the invaders' impenetrable shields. "We've tried everything we have," one of her officers said, his voice cracking with frustration. "Nothing works. They're just too powerful." Catherine gritted her teeth, trying to suppress her panic. But beneath the surface, her thoughts were racing. The world was depending on them. She could hear the voices of world leaders through the intercom, their demands escalating with each passing second. "We need to do something, General. People are panicking. If we don't respond, we'll lose everything." Catherine's gaze lingered on the map of the world, her mind shifting gears. For the first time in her career, she felt the weight of an enemy too powerful to defeat through traditional means. But then, something caught her attention. A small report came through the secure line, showing footage of the alien fleet, but from a different angle, taken from an anonymous source. The footage seemed to show something strange. There, on the edge of the fleet, was a single alien ship, seemingly unguarded and distinct from the rest. It appeared to be hovering above a quiet region in the countryside, as if observing rather than attacking. Catherine's mind started to piece together a theory, one that seemed insane yet strangely plausible. "What if they're waiting for us to make the first move?" she whispered under her breath. One of her officers, a young lieutenant named Brad, overheard her. "You think they want us to strike first?" Catherine nodded slowly. "Or maybe they want us to break. They want to see how far they can push us before we give up. If we don't fall apart, if we show them we're more than just our military might, maybe we can turn the tide." Brad looked skeptical, but there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "What do we do now?" Catherine exhaled deeply, her fingers tapping on the table. "We play their game. We find out what they want, what they're really testing us for." Meanwhile, back in Elias's small town, life had become a mix of uncertainty and resolve. People had begun to form small groups, sharing resources, making plans, and organizing in the face of the growing alien threat. But even among the fearful, there was an undeniable sense of purpose. Elias spent the night in the town hall, meeting with local leaders, trying to piece together a strategy for survival. Despite his growing anxiety, there was something that kept him grounded. Lily's words echoed in his mind, "We have heart." When he returned home early the next morning, he found Margaret and Lily huddled by the television, watching an emergency broadcast. The familiar face of a news anchor flickered on the screen. "Reports are flooding in from across the globe," the anchor was saying. "Across Europe, Asia, and the Americas, resistance groups are beginning to form. Ordinary citizens are standing up against the invaders. They're organizing, they're fighting back." Elias's heart swelled with a mixture of pride and disbelief. He had always known people were resilient, but seeing this on the news, knowing that the world was finally starting to fight back, it felt like the spark of hope he had been searching for. Margaret looked up at him, her eyes filled with concern but also a small glimmer of hope. "Elias, we can't sit here waiting any longer. We have to do something." "Lily's right. We can't just let them take over." Elias paused, taking in the gravity of her words. He looked at his daughter, who had a determined look on her face, and something clicked inside him. The aliens had underestimated humanity. They thought they could break them with their overwhelming power. But they hadn't accounted for the strength of the human spirit. Elias didn't know exactly what they would do yet, but one thing was clear, they weren't going to surrender. "I agree," he said firmly. "We need to find out what we're up against. But we're not doing this alone." In a small village in Africa, a group of former soldiers and civilians gathered in secret. Their leader, a man named Rafik, had once fought for his country in multiple conflicts, but today, he found himself facing an entirely new battle. Word had spread that the alien ships were not just an invasion force, they were a test. The aliens weren't attacking the world just to conquer it, they were watching, waiting to see how humanity would react. Rafik knew that if humanity's greatest strength was their unity, then they had to show it. They needed to fight together, not just as soldiers or civilians, but as human beings standing side by side, regardless of their past differences. "We are not afraid," Rafik said as he addressed the group, his voice calm but firm. "We may be outnumbered, we may be outmatched, but we have one thing they do not understand, we have each other." The group nodded in agreement, ready to take whatever steps were necessary to protect their homes and families. Rafik's words carried weight, and they sparked something within the hearts of the gathered people. They were no longer just survivors. They were fighters. Back in the heart of the alien fleet, Zaylor stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring out at Earth below. His earlier observations had proven unsettling. The humans weren't panicking. They weren't cowering. They were fighting back in ways he couldn't predict, gathering in groups, organizing resistance efforts across the globe. "These humans," Zaylor murmured to himself, his voice low with contemplation. "They are not like the other species we have encountered. They adapt. They resist." Elon, his advisor, approached with a report. "Commander, the humans have begun coordinating their efforts. They are working together. It seems their resilience is greater than we anticipated." Zaylor's eyes narrowed. "We will push them harder. We will test them further." As humanity prepared for the challenges ahead, it became increasingly clear that the invaders were not simply seeking to destroy Earth. They were testing humanity, probing for weaknesses. And in doing so, they had underestimated the one thing that had carried humanity through every challenge, their unwavering determination. Elias, Margaret, and Lily weren't just fighting for their survival, they were fighting for the survival of a species that had been underestimated for far too long. Together, they would prove to the aliens that humanity had more to offer than they could ever imagine. The quiet resolve that had begun to take root among humanity was now turning into something far more powerful, a global resistance, forged in the crucible of adversity. Every city, every corner of the world, had become a battleground. But it wasn't just the soldiers who were rising to fight, everyday people, from teachers to farmers to engineers, were stepping up to play their part. Together, they would defy the invaders, and Elias, Margaret, and Lily would find themselves at the very heart of this growing movement. In the heart of a once bustling city now reduced to rubble, General Catherine Harris stood on a rooftop, surveying the destruction. The city had been one of the first targets in the alien invasion, and now, only the faint remnants of civilization remained. Yet, amid the ruins, there was a sense of hope that had taken root, a spark that could not be extinguished, no matter how powerful the invaders were. Catherine adjusted her tactical gear and turned to her team, who were gathering around a makeshift command center set up in an abandoned skyscraper. "We've had no contact from Central Command in over 48 hours, she said, her voice steady but edged with tension. "It's just us now. But that means we have the freedom to act without orders. We need to organize every fighter, every civilian willing to stand, and we need to hit them hard." Her officers nodded, but one officer, Lieutenant Brad, spoke up. "But General, our weapons are barely scratching their ships. How can we fight back?" Catherine's eyes flashed with determination. "We fight with what we have. And we use what we've learned. The aliens are arrogant. They think they can break us, that we'll fold under pressure. But they don't understand us. Humanity doesn't back down. We don't give up." Brad looked uncertain, but there was no denying the resolve in Catherine's voice. She had seen the people of Earth stand up to impossible odds before, and it was this spirit she would rely on now. "We need to contact the other resistance groups," she continued. "If we can unite them under one banner, we can create a force the aliens can't ignore." Meanwhile, in a remote forest, Elias, Margaret, and Lily were preparing for their next move. They had spent the last few days in hiding, surviving on limited supplies while they planned their next steps. But Elias could feel the change in the air. There was no more time to sit idly by. They needed to be part of something bigger. "We can't keep hiding out here," Margaret said, her voice sharp with purpose. "There's a resistance forming, Elias. We've seen the broadcasts. People are coming together." Elias nodded. "I know. But how do we help? We're not soldiers. We don't have weapons. We're just regular people." "You're not just regular people," Lily said, her voice full of conviction. "We have heart. And sometimes that's enough." Elias looked at her, his daughter's words sinking in. She was right. They might not have the military might, but they had something far more powerful, the will to fight for their home, for their future. "We're going to help them," Elias said, the decision clear in his mind. "We'll find a way." Margaret looked at him, her eyes softening. "What if we can't win? What if we're just—" Elias interrupted her, his voice firm. "We will. Because we have to. There's no other choice. We fight because that's who we are." The resistance network was growing, and as it did, so did the realization that the world was more united than ever. Even in the face of unimaginable odds, humanity was coming together in ways the invaders had not anticipated. Governments, military factions, and civilian groups had begun to share intelligence, resources, and strategies, all in the hope of mounting a coordinated offensive. In a small town in Europe, a group of engineers and scientists were working around the clock to develop a new weapon, one that could potentially pierce the alien shields. They had no guarantee it would work, but the hope of creating something to fight back was enough to fuel their tireless efforts. At the heart of this underground operation was Dr. Sofia Alvarez, a brilliant scientist who had once studied alien technology as part of a global research initiative. Now, her knowledge would become humanity's greatest hope. Dr. Alvarez, one of her colleagues said, "You're saying we could create a weapon that will actually break through their shields?" Sofia nodded, her eyes focused on the design schematics in front of her. "It's theoretical, but if we can reverse engineer some of the materials they used in their ships, we might have a chance. But we need time, and we need resources." "Time is something we don't have," another scientist said grimly. "The aliens are getting closer. We need a breakthrough, and we need it now." Sofia's mind raced, but she couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency. If they didn't succeed in their efforts, Earth would fall to the invaders. But there was a fire in her heart, the same fire that had driven her to study the alien technology in the first place. "We won't fail," Sofia said with quiet resolve. "We'll find a way. We have to." Back in the Resistance Command Center, General Catherine Harris received a message from a resistance group in Africa. It was a long shot, but they had found a way to temporarily disable one of the alien ships using a modified electromagnetic pulse. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it gave them a glimpse of hope. "We've got a window," Catherine said, turning to her team. "It's not much, but it's something. We strike now, with everything we've got." As the team began to prepare for the upcoming mission, Catherine couldn't help but feel the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. The world was depending on them, and every move they made could mean the difference between survival and extinction. In the heart of the alien fleet, Zaylor stood on the bridge of his ship, watching the chaos unfold below. His tactical advantage was unparalleled, but there was something troubling about the humans. They weren't cowering like other species. They weren't broken. They were adapting, learning. It was both fascinating and frustrating. "They're not reacting the way we expected," Elin said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "They're learning faster than we anticipated. We must increase the pressure." Zaylor's eyes narrowed, and he made a decision. "We will test them even further. Let's see just how far they can bend before they break." The stage was set for a showdown unlike anything humanity had ever faced. The resistance was growing, their forces becoming more organized, their resolve strengthening with every passing day. But the aliens, too, were preparing for something far greater, a test that could decide the fate of the Earth. And as the resistance made its move, they would soon learn whether humanity's heart was enough to defeat an invincible enemy. The resistance had become more than just a series of scattered groups, it had morphed into a full-fledged global movement. Every corner of the world, from the ruins of cities to the dense forests, was now a front line. And as the alien forces tightened their grip, humanity's response had become fierce and unified. The unthinkable was happening, Earth was fighting back. Elias stood on a makeshift battlefield, the air heavy with the smell of dust and smoke. Beside him, Margaret and Lily were preparing for what could be their most dangerous mission yet. The resistance had managed to secure a rare opportunity, a brief window to strike at one of the alien command centers. If they succeeded, it would cripple the invaders' control over the planet, but failure meant certain death. "This is it," Margaret said, tightening the straps of her gear. "This is our shot to make a difference." Elias nodded, but the weight of the situation was heavy on his chest. They were all risking everything, not just their lives, but the future of humanity. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, he felt a sense of determination rise within him. "We're not just fighting for survival," he said, his voice steady. "We're fighting for our future." Lily, holding a rifle in her hands, looked up at him. "We've come this far. We can't turn back now." Elias placed a hand on her shoulder, his eyes meeting hers. "We won't." They knew they had to succeed. The alien forces were growing stronger, and they needed to hit them where it hurt. It was now or never. At the Resistance Command Center, General Catherine Harris and Dr. Sofia Alvarez were overseeing the operation. The pulse weapon developed by Sofia's team was ready, but it was still experimental. No one could be sure if it would work, but there was no other choice. "General, we're ready to deploy the device," Dr. Alvarez said, her voice tinged with both excitement and fear. "If this works, we'll have a chance. If it doesn't, we risk everything." Catherine took a deep breath, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of a map. The alien forces had begun to regroup, and their next attack would likely be a devastating one. This mission could give humanity a glimmer of hope. "We'll make sure it works," Catherine said, her voice resolute. "We don't have a choice." As Elias and the team approached the alien command center, they moved with precision, staying in the shadows to avoid detection. The alien technology surrounding the complex was unlike anything they had ever seen, the shimmering shields and high-tech surveillance systems intimidating. But they had learned to adapt. Every step they took brought them closer to the heart of the invaders' power. "We're almost there," Margaret whispered, her eyes scanning the area. "Stay sharp." Elias's heart raced, but he pushed the fear aside. They had come too far to falter now. They couldn't afford any mistakes. As they breached the perimeter of the facility, a sudden alarm blared, echoing through the night. The aliens had detected them. "We've been compromised," Elias shouted, drawing his weapon. "Move, move, move." Gunfire erupted from all sides as alien soldiers materialized, their advanced armor making them nearly impervious to bullets. The resistance fighters fought with everything they had, but the aliens' firepower was overwhelming. Despite their courage, they were outmatched. "We need to get to the core," Elias yelled to his team, pushing forward. The pulse weapon was their only chance to disrupt the alien network. But it wasn't going to be easy. Lily fired a shot, knocking an alien soldier back, but there were too many. A blast of energy hit the ground near her, sending her sprawling to the dirt. "Lily!" Margaret shouted, rushing to her side. "Are you okay?" Lily groaned but nodded. "I'm fine. We have to keep moving." They pressed on, knowing they couldn't stop now. Every moment was crucial. Back at the command center, General Harris watched the live feed, her pulse quickening as the team neared the core. They had to make it. If they could just deploy the weapon, they might stand a chance. Sophia, who had been pacing anxiously, stopped and turned to her. "General, the weapon is still untested. What if it doesn't work?" Catherine's eyes never left the screen. "We don't have the luxury of second chances." Sophia hesitated, then nodded grimly. There was nothing left to do but hope. The team made it to the core, but they were met with a final line of defense, a shield that could only be bypassed using a special key they had stolen from an alien officer earlier. But as Elias inserted the key into the device, a loud beep echoed, signaling a failure. "What's wrong?" Margaret asked, panic rising in her voice. "Something's wrong with the key," Elias said, his voice strained. "We can't disable the shield without it." "Try again," Lily urged, gripping her rifle tightly as the alien soldiers closed in. Elias tried again, sweat pouring down his face. He inserted the key, and this time, the shield began to flicker and weaken. "We're in," Elias shouted. With seconds to spare, he activated the pulse weapon. A blinding light filled the room, and for a moment, everything went silent. Then, the entire alien network began to shudder. The facility trembled as the pulse weapon did its work, knocking out the alien central systems. "We did it," Margaret said, breathing heavily. "We actually did it." But before they could celebrate, the ground shook violently. A loud rumble echoed through the facility, and the ceiling above them began to collapse. The mission wasn't over yet. "We have to get out of here, now," Elias yelled. As they made their way back to the extraction point, the facility crumbled around them, the alien stronghold falling apart as their systems shut down. The resistance had dealt a crippling blow, but the cost was high. They had taken on more than they could handle, and the path ahead was uncertain. As they climbed into the extraction vehicle, Elias looked at his team, exhausted but triumphant. They had done what many thought impossible. "This is just the beginning," Elias said, his voice steady. "We're not stopping here. The aliens may have lost this battle, but the war is far from over." Margaret nodded. "We're in this together. We fight until it's over." The mission had been successful, but victory came at a tremendous cost. As Elias and his team made their escape, the alien command center collapsed behind them, sending shockwaves through the surrounding area. The battle had taken everything they had, but they had dealt a crippling blow to the invaders' central operations. Despite the loss of many of their comrades, the remaining resistance fighters were more determined than ever. This was the moment humanity had been waiting for. The extraction vehicle raced through the deserted streets, its engine roaring as it sped toward the safe house. The team was battered and bruised, but they knew they had to keep moving. The world was still in chaos, but for the first time in months, there was a glimmer of hope. "Status report?" Elias asked, his eyes scanning the surroundings as the vehicle swerved around debris. "We're clear for now," Margaret said, wiping the dirt from her face. "But we're not out of the woods yet. The aliens will be hunting us down relentlessly." Lily, still clutching her rifle, nodded. "We can't let our guard down." Elias glanced at her, his expression serious. "We won't." When they reached the safe house, General Harris was already waiting for them, her face a mixture of relief and urgency. The news of their success had spread fast, and now they had to prepare for the next phase of the war. The aliens would be reeling from the loss of their command center, but they would retaliate with even more force. "Elias, Margaret, Lily, you did it," Catherine said, her voice hoarse from the stress. "You've given us a chance, but this fight is far from over." "We're ready," Elias said. "Whatever it takes." Catherine looked at them, her eyes filled with gratitude but also with a deep sadness. The battle isn't just about taking down their infrastructure. It's about breaking their will. They need to see that we're not just surviving, we're winning. The weight of her words hit them hard. It wasn't just a physical war they were fighting, but a psychological one. They had to show the aliens that humanity would never submit, that they had the strength to fight back, no matter how impossible the odds seemed. The days that followed were filled with preparation and tension. The resistance had gained a foothold, but they needed to build on that victory. The aliens would not go down quietly. They had to strike at their leadership, dismantling the core of their operation piece by piece. Elias, Margaret, and Lily trained harder than ever, each of them pushing themselves to the limit. They knew what they were up against. The aliens were relentless, technologically superior, and highly organized. But humanity had one thing they didn't: the ability to adapt, to outthink and outlast. That was what would make all the difference. The resistance set its sights on the next target, an alien command ship stationed in low Earth orbit. If they could destroy it, they would cut off the aliens' ability to coordinate their forces across the planet. But the mission was dangerous, much more dangerous than anything they had done before. "We've only got one shot at this," Margaret said, as the team gathered around the briefing table. "If we don't take down that command ship, they'll launch their counterattack, and we'll be back to square one." Elias nodded, his expression hardening. "Then we take it down. No excuses." Lily looked at them both. "We've come this far. We're not stopping now." As they prepared to board their transport ship, Elias couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed since the alien invasion began. The world was no longer the same, cities were in ruins, millions were dead, and families torn apart. But amidst all the chaos, humanity had discovered something within themselves they hadn't known existed: an unshakable will to survive. It wasn't just about saving the planet anymore, it was about proving that humanity could not be defeated. "Stay focused," Elias said to his team, his voice steady. "This is our chance. We can't afford to fail." Margaret and Lily nodded, the weight of the mission clear in their eyes. They knew the risks, but they were prepared to face them head-on. They were in this together, and that bond would be their strength. The transport ship launched into the dark void of space, the Earth shrinking below them. As they approached the alien command ship, the tension was palpable. The crew was silent, each person lost in their thoughts, knowing that their mission would determine the fate of humanity. 5 minutes to target, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Prepare for insertion." Elias's mind raced. This was the moment that could change everything. The ship they were approaching was the heart of the alien fleet, their center of operations. If they could take it down, they would cripple their ability to coordinate further assaults. But the stakes were higher than ever. The aliens would not let them succeed without a fight. "Ready?" Elias asked, turning to his team. "As will ever be," Margaret said, checking her gear one last time. Lily nodded. "Let's end this." They landed silently on the command ship's surface, using the cover of darkness to infiltrate the enemy stronghold. Every move had to be calculated. They had no room for error. As they crept through the corridors, they encountered alien patrols, but their training and experience allowed them to stay one step ahead. Every mission had sharpened their skills, and now, they were ready. They reached the heart of the command ship, where the alien leadership was located. The core of the alien operation was housed here. They had to act quickly. A small explosion from the pulse device they carried would be enough to cause massive damage. But time was running out. Elias took a deep breath. This was it, the moment they had been fighting for. They had made it this far, and now they had to finish what they had started. As Elias triggered the device, a deafening blast shook the ship. The core of the alien command ship exploded in a brilliant flash of light, and everything went black. The explosion rocked the alien command ship like an earthquake, sending shockwaves through its metal hull. Elias, Margaret, and Lily were thrown off their feet, their bodies slamming into the cold, metallic walls. The blast had been more powerful than they anticipated, far more destructive. The ship structure groaned as it began to collapse, the very heart of the alien operation in ruins. For a moment, everything was a blur of flashing lights and clattering alarms. The oppressive hum of the alien machinery that had dominated the ship's corridors now seemed distant, replaced by the eerie silence of impending collapse. The mission had been a success, but the fight wasn't over. They still had to escape. "Move!" Elias shouted, his voice cutting through the disorienting noise. "We need to get out of here, now." Margaret scrambled to her feet, her rifle still in hand. "The ship's destabilizing. We've got less than 10 minutes before it's all over." Lily was already on her feet, scanning the corridor for any signs of movement. "No more aliens to worry about, but there are still systems we need to bypass if we're going to make it out." They made their way down the twisting hallways of the alien ship, the structure around them beginning to groan and shift as it buckled under the pressure of the explosion. Each step was filled with urgency, their breaths sharp and ragged. Every moment felt like a race against time. "Do you think it's enough?" Margaret asked, her eyes wide with a mixture of exhaustion and hope. "The explosion, we took out their command core. But is it enough to break them?" Elias didn't answer immediately. His mind was focused on the task at hand, survival. But he couldn't help but think about her question. Had they done enough? The aliens were still a formidable force, and even with their command ship destroyed, they would likely retaliate with all their might. But Elias had seen something in his team, in humanity, that the aliens didn't understand. The strength to push forward when everything seemed lost. "I don't know," he said finally, his voice low. But we can't stop now. They reached the escape pod bay, and the trio quickly made their way to the nearest craft. The countdown to launch was already ticking down, and they knew they didn't have long before the ship was completely unsalvageable. 10 seconds, the pilot of the escape pod announced, his voice crackling through their comms. Buckle in. The pod's doors slammed shut behind them, sealing them in a cocoon of steel. The countdown continued. 5, 4, 3. Elias could feel his heart pounding in his chest, his eyes glued to the countdown. They were leaving the alien ship behind, but the war was far from over. Even if they survived this escape, they knew they still had a long road ahead of them. The countdown reached 0. With a violent jolt, the escape pod launched into the cold expanse of space. They had made it. For now. Back on Earth, the news spread like wildfire. The Resistance had succeeded in destroying the alien command center. The shockwaves from the destruction reached every corner of the world, igniting a renewed sense of hope in the hearts of humanity. It was a small victory in a war that had taken too many lives, but it was enough to fuel the fire that would burn brighter than ever before. Humanity had shown its strength, its ability to fight back when faced with an impossible enemy. They had proven that they could adapt, that they could rise up, even in the face of overwhelming odds. It was a victory that resonated across the globe, inspiring resistance groups to form in every nation. Elias, Margaret, and Lily stood at the center of the storm, their mission far from over. They had taken a vital step, but the war was still raging. The alien forces, though shaken, were not finished yet. The future remained uncertain, but one thing was clear: humanity had found its courage, and they would not give up. Not now. Not ever. As Elias and his team made their way back to Earth, they were met with a hero's welcome. The destruction of the alien command center was a turning point, but they knew the fight wasn't won yet. The real work was just beginning. They landed at a remote resistance base, greeted by hundreds of weary soldiers, volunteers, and civilians, people who had been waiting for this moment. The hope they had carried through years of suffering was now tangible. But even amidst the celebrations, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that the aliens were only waiting for the right moment to strike back. "We did it," Margaret said quietly, her voice breaking the silence. "For now," Elias replied, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "But we keep moving forward. We can't stop." Lily nodded, her expression determined. "We never will." In the days that followed, humanity's resolve was put to the test. The aliens, though reeling from the destruction of their command center, were far from defeated. They began to regroup, pulling back to their remaining strongholds. The war was entering a new phase, one that would require more sacrifice, more strength, and more courage than ever before. Elias, Margaret, and Lily, along with the rest of the resistance, began to prepare for what was coming. The aliens would not give up their fight so easily. They would retaliate with everything they had left, but humanity had proven that it would fight until the last breath. The final battle was still ahead of them. But for the first time in a long while, humanity was no longer on the defensive. They had taken the fight to the aliens, and they would continue to do so, until the very end. The escape pod drifted through the vacuum of space, leaving behind the wreckage of the alien command ship. The hum of the pod's engines was a faint reminder of the success they had achieved, but it was quickly overshadowed by the heavy weight of what lay ahead. Elias, Margaret, and Lily sat in silence, the adrenaline from their narrow escape starting to fade. Though they had completed their mission, the cost of it had been high. They knew the destruction of the command ship was just one step in a long and brutal conflict. There were still countless alien forces spread throughout the galaxy, and many of them were already preparing to strike back. But as the stars streaked by outside the pod, Elias couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. It was a fragile hope, one born from the resilience of humanity and the strength of those who had come together to fight for their future. They had taken a stand, and the aliens had seen it. It wasn't just their weapons or technology that had made them a threat, it was their unyielding spirit, the one thing the aliens hadn't accounted for. "We did it," Margaret said softly, breaking the silence. Her voice was filled with both relief and exhaustion. "For now," Elias replied, his gaze fixed on the stars outside. "But it's not over. Not by a long shot." Lily leaned forward in her seat, her eyes intense. "We've made a statement. But the aliens won't just sit back and let us win. They'll come after us harder than ever." The reality of their situation hung in the air, thick with unspoken words. But there was also something else, something deeper. They had seen humanity's potential in that moment. They had seen how they could rise above, how they could unite in the face of overwhelming odds. And that was the most dangerous thing to the aliens. As the pod drifted closer to Earth, the familiar blue-green sphere of their home planet growing larger in the view, Elias felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. The victory had been hard-earned, but it was just the beginning of a much larger struggle. It was no longer just about surviving, it was about ensuring that humanity's story didn't end here. The first thing Elias noticed and they landed back on Earth was the quiet. After the constant chaos of battle, the brief moment of stillness felt foreign, almost surreal. The small resistance base they had returned to was surrounded by dense forests, a stark contrast to the metal and fire of the alien warships they had just left behind. They were greeted by a mixture of cheers and somber faces. The news of the destruction of the alien command center had spread quickly, and while many celebrated, there was an undercurrent of uncertainty. Everyone knew that this battle had been only one part of a much larger war. But there was something in the air, a sense of unity and resolve that hadn't been there before. Humanity had faced its darkest hour and survived. And now, the world would rebuild, together. "I've been thinking about something," Margaret said as they disembarked from the pod, her voice quieter than usual. "We've been fighting to survive, but maybe it's time we start fighting for something more. For a future." Elias nodded, his expression hardening with resolve. "A future where we don't have to hide in the shadows anymore. A future where humanity stands tall and faces whatever comes next. We can't just keep reacting. We need to take the fight to them." "We can do it," Lily added, her eyes filled with determination. "We've already proven we can stand up to them. We've shown them that we're not afraid. And that's what will make the difference." The three of them stood together, looking out at the base that would serve as the heart of the human resistance for years to come. The journey they had started was far from over, but they had laid the foundation for something much bigger. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore, they were fighting for the future of their children, their grandchildren, and the generations to come. As Elias looked out over the base, he saw the faces of ordinary men and women, soldiers, doctors, farmers, teachers, all working together toward a common goal. It wasn't just a fight for Earth. It was a fight for everything humanity had ever stood for: freedom, hope, and the belief that no matter how dark the road ahead might seem, they would never give up. As the weeks passed, the human resistance began to gain momentum. The alien forces, though formidable, were scattered and disorganized. The destruction of their command center had shaken them, and they were struggling to regroup. Humanity had found its strength, its resolve, and it was only a matter of time before the alien invaders realized just how dangerous that could be. But even as they prepared for the next phase of the war, Elias and his team knew that the real victory had already been won. They had shown the world that humanity was not a passive species, waiting for its fate to be decided by others. They had shown that, no matter the odds, humanity would rise. And in that rising, they had discovered something far more powerful than any weapon or advanced technology. They had discovered the indomitable will to survive, to fight, and to hope. It was this spirit that would carry them through the toughest battles yet to come.